Lonely grief is hounding me like a lonely shadow hounding me. It's always there, just out of sight, like a frightening dream on a lightning night. Lonely wind cries out my name, sad as haunted music in the rain. It's born of grief and born of woe, but I hear it call and I've got to go. Where can I be headed for? The blues crawled in my door to lick my heart once more. Love lives in a lonely land where there's no helping hand to understand. Why does it bring this ache to me? Why? It don't matter why. I only know misery has to be part of me. Never hope to count on love to be a partner of that heaven up above. Never hope to understand love is a barren land, a lonely land, a lonely land. I wanted to wake you up, and I'm afraid what I'm going to say might put you to sleep, but it's in the same vein, because I'm going to talk about how form goes a lot of different ways, and we use it however we can use it, whatever tools we have at the moment, whatever comes to us. Now, that was a Billie Holiday song I heard when I was 14 years old. And when I heard that song for the first time in my life, I understood I wasn't alone in the world. I understood there were people out there who spoke my language. And it was really the first time I got that. And so to me, it's Saint Billie Holiday, and the singing came into my poetry. I sang that song once at a poetry reading. It must have been 20 years ago at Bread Loaf. And occasionally I would sing that song at a reading. And then, and I'll talk a little bit about how the singing came into my new book. So, The Undertaker's Daughter. But anyway, Ed said yesterday that the most important thing we can do in our talk is help you think about what you're doing, you're writing, and you're reading. So my talk is mostly notes about my thinking about my own thinking about form, and take what's useful to you and just leave the rest. 10 years ago, I met the poet Wanshan, the first exiled poet to come to live in Pittsburgh at City of Asylum. How many of you know about City of Asylum, where exiled poets come and live for 2 years? It's become a thriving community of writers and readers that had just been established at that time. He was the first writer. He had a large and joyful presence, not just in his work, but in his very being. He covered his house with Chinese calligraphies of his poems, these huge calligraphies. And I always wondered about this joyous nature of his being, this largeness, and I never really understood it until I talked a couple years later with the dentist who had reconstructed his whole mouth after torture in the prisons in China. And then it occurred to me that this joy that he was emanating was not a daily choice about how he was going to feel today. It was a choice about joy as a force against the oppression that wanted to kill him and kill his voice. And the line that occurred to me is that joy is an act of resistance. And this made me realize that choices that we make in our art are also choices that we make in our life. Toni Morrison, in one of the most brilliant and beautiful books I've ever read, in The Bluest Eye, tells about the life of Piccola Breedlove, a poor, abandoned, unhoused, raped, pregnant, ugly black child. In the first chapter of the book, she rewrites a story that is in a first grade school reader. And this is the story, the first paragraph of the book. Here is the house. It is green and white. It has a red door. It is very pretty. Here is the family. Mother, father, Dick, and Jane live in the green and white house. They are very happy. See Jane. She has a red dress. She wants to play. Who will play with Jane? See the cat. It goes meow, meow. Well, you know the whole story. So the second time she writes it, it's the very same paragraph, but she writes it without punctuation, without capital letters. So all the words are closer together. And then the third time she writes it without caps, punctuation, or space, so that it's a block across the page, just block of black letters, indecipherable language. And so in this way, it seems to me, she takes the text and lets us know what Piccola is reading about her life in the text. And I had the same, how her light relates to this block of words and where she fits in it or doesn't fit in it. And I had the same experience. I hope first grade readers have changed a lot since then, but I had the same experience when I read my first grade reader in 1948. I understood there was a huge part of my experience that wasn't to be talked about in the same space as I was learning language. Maybe my life was dirty or threatening, like smoking, unhealthy to others. I had to take it outside. But I was given the forms. I didn't have any other language. You have to use what you are given, however damaging, to remake the story. At the Chancellor's reading on Thursday night, I read from the first section of my book, The Undertaker's Daughter, about the violence in my childhood, especially my father's violence, and I sang those parts. Several people asked me why I sang, and it was because the night before I was to give my first reading from the book, I realized I couldn't say the poems. They were too painful, and I couldn't go through that pain again. It was like I hit a wall. I sat down in my living room totally devastated. What would I do? People were waiting for my reading, and a voice said, "Sing them." But that was also terrifying. I had no melody. I can't sing. What would I sing? A voice said, "Just open your mouth." I'd like to talk for a minute about going back to formlessness before you know what is going to happen, what is going to come out of your mouth. You don't know what you're doing, and about being where the good stuff comes from. Form is a physical word, the self in space, our form. It's about being, how to work the self out of silence. Sometimes you have to lose your footing. You have to lose ground. For example, could prose be an act of resistance against poetry? In the early 1980s, when Toni Morrison was an editor at Random House, she kept my second book, Natural Birth, for 9 months, then sent it back saying, "We don't know how to classify it. Is it poetry or prose?" When I began writing the Black Notebooks, I was in the middle of a suicidal depression. I was so tired from months of insomnia that I really could hardly hold a pencil. And when I first had the ability to sit at a table and write, I had no words, no understanding of what I was writing. My first writings were just holding a pencil over a paper and just making marks on the paper. It was chicken scratch. The only form I had was what occurred to me that moved my hand. It seemed I had gone back to formlessness, but I had started. I do the work for myself. I think we do the work for ourselves. And a lot of times you have to do it or something in you dies. And when you do it, as hard as it is, it's easier than not doing it. But you also do it for others. You speak for someone else, and it helps them come alive. How many of you have started with something and not known what it is? Perhaps you won't know until you've finished writing it, months or even years later. Perhaps it keeps expanding and you keep shaking it down until you find out what's at the center, like a secret you're unburying. And when you find the center, you can start to find the beginning and the end. I see in the Black Notebooks, voice becomes not a synthesis of opposing voices, but rather a path of energy that is followed on all sides, one that gains egress past restrictions by bowing to them at the same time they are disobeyed, by bargaining and earning, not only to go around competing and repressive voices, but also to address them, to listen and record, to disarm them and bring them to another perspective, to resolve conflicting aims. So I'm the co-founder of a national organization called Kavikanam. It's a national organization of African American poets. And the brilliant writers who are faculty and fellows, I think, are addressing these in their writing all the time, and in so doing are changing the texts and the stories, but not only the text, but the way we read and think about them. So some of those writers are Claudia, Tracy K. Smith, Cornelius Eady, Elizabeth Alexander, Terrence Hayes, and Harriet Mullen and Kwame Dawes, among many others. Thank you.